Hello, this is Tom Bird. I'm the Fire Weather Program Manager and Incident Meteorologist for the National Weather Service Forecast Office in El Paso. This presentation will look at the 2017 Fire Season Outlook. Well, in this audience, I probably don't need to say it, but one of the reasons we look at weather is because it's one of the three primary factors that impact fire behavior. One being topography, the other one being fuel, and the last one, and maybe the most important one as it goes in time scale, is weather. Before we get started with the outlook for the season, let's take a quick look at what the fire season looks like across the Southwest. And when we look at it based on the energy release component across Arizona, New Mexico, and West Texas, this is when we see these dates on this map for each one of these predictive services regions across the area. These are the dates when we see that ERC on average hit the top of its arc as it's coming up through the spring before it starts trailing back down as we get monsoon moisture later in the summertime. This peak can vary by 1 or 2 weeks either side. So for the southwestern mountains of New Mexico, we are looking at around June 23rd, the third week of June. Now, let's look at what we typically think of as the end of large fire season. And this is, again, based on the energy release components for the fuels. And we see rapid decreases in those ERCs once we start ingesting moisture from the south as the monsoon begins to set up. And typically, on average, what we're looking at in the Southwest Mountains, Southwest Predictive Services 08, we're looking around the end of the first week of July. Of course, again, this can vary in either an early wet year or a late dry year. Okay, the way we're going to take our approach for the outlook for this season is we're going to use what they do up at Predictive Services. So a lot of this material is based on their work with some of the stuff I put in there to try to enhance what they've done. But anyway, the folks up in Albuquerque have decided over the last several years to start trying to be more objective about how they rate the fire season, not just here in the Southwest, but across the entire country. And they're starting to use these 5 main considerations or predictors for what the fire season might look like as they apply it to different parts of the country. Down here in the Southwest, we're looking at drought, which kind of gives you the big picture on fuel conditions. The fine fuel conditions, how much of it we do have and how continuous it might be, being the main carrier of fire. That has a big impact on how fires grow. Number 3 is the seasonal temperatures and precipitation, which is what are we going into fire season like based on so what's the setup going to be for fire weather. Number 4, we go into spring and early summer weather patterns, and then what we're looking at there is in-season ignitions and spread potentials. And then finally the monsoon, which kind of signifies the season ending setup. Starting from the top and working our way down, number 1 was the drought. And just a week or so ago, this is what the drought monitor looked like across the United States. And if you look, basically it's much better than it has in a long time, especially as you move west of the Continental Divide in the western states and even in the southwestern United States. In our area, you can see the drought has been largely mitigated by an extended period of average to above average precipitation across the area. Here is a look back a year ago on the left and pretty recent here on the right. And so you can see how the drought has improved over the course of the last 12 months for much of the Southwest and northwestern states. And it shows even when you come down into New Mexico and Arizona. Last year, the Gila region down here was looking at moderate drought conditions going into fire season. This year, we're looking at maybe some abnormally dry regions, but typically pretty close to what we would normally expect for our moisture conditions going into this. Something else I thought that would be neat to look at is let's take a look back 7 years and see how the drought has looked each March since 2011. And then I've also put some fire symbols on some of these maps, and these would be the Miller Fire out in the Gila region, the Whitewater Baldy Fire in 2012, and then the Little Bear Fire over in the Sacramento Mountains. And then finally in 2013 we had the Silver Fire. And if you just compare what the drought situation looked like during these fires to what we see down here in the bottom right of 2017, you see a big difference. And the last several years, the drought has been on the improving trend, and we haven't seen the large fires across our area in these last several years. And so as far as drought's concerned, we're looking pretty good going into the fire season. And really this is typically what we look at to try to get a handle on the state of the larger type fuels that are most impacted by drought. And so we're looking at the higher elevations with the big timber actually not being as stressed and as dry as they were in years past. Here's the outlook for drought going forward through the end of June. So this gets us through much of the fire season. And you'll notice over the Gila region, southwestern New Mexico, far eastern Arizona, we don't see a signal that we would have drought development over the area. So that's also working in our favor. Number two was the fine fuels. So looking on the left-hand side of this, you see these three graphs. And what these are the total precipitation percentiles. And these are last year's charts for June. The middle one is August and the bottom one is September. And what you do see is some green over our area. And what that indicates is above normal precipitation through these months. Now these are the warm growing months, and so this is when you grow your grasses. And we did have ample precipitation during this period to help us grow some fine fuels. If you look to the top left, now we're looking over here at fuel moisture rankings, and you can see, especially as you move southwestern New Mexico, you have above normal soil moisture, which also facilitates the growth of this season's fine fuels. And so a crop of new grass is anticipated with the warming conditions this year. And then finally in the bottom right is the departure from average greenness, and basically that's just an indication of whether you have normal fuel loading or below normal. And with greens over our area, we're at normal and above. There's some years you drive across the deserts and you just see dirt. Well, this year you drive across the desert, you see a lot of grass. So we're high on fuel loading. So the drought improvement, what we've seen usually means an increase in grasses with more loading and continuity. There is substantial carryover of last year's warm season fine fuels that was driven by substantial 2016 precipitation. This year we feature normal to above normal fine fuel loading and continuity with some new growth. And so the bottom line is good carryover from last year with additional growth from this spring should equal a significant amount of fine fuels to potentially carry fire. Okay, now moving to the third item, which is how are we going to go into fire season speaking weather-wise. So on the left-hand side, we have our rankings of temperatures for the cool season, December, January, February. On the right side, we have those same rankings for precipitation. So for that 3-month period, December through February, we have 122 years of rankings for each state. So each state's number represents where that last cool season, this last winter, fell in that full range of 122 years. What you'll notice down here in Texas on the upper left is Texas has 122, meaning it was, if you order all their years in a row from coldest being 1 to warmest being 122, they had their warmest winter on record. New Mexico had its second warmest winter on record. And if you look below, you can kind of see the distribution of where it was the warmest ever on record. There was some of these areas in New Mexico that was the warmest record. Not so much so in the Gila, but it was much above normal temperatures. Now on the right hand side, going over to the precipitation now, we were 113 out of 122. So that means there was only 9 years wetter during that 3-month period out of 122 that we have of record. So it does mean that it was a wet winter, relatively speaking to normal, across the area as you average it for the state. And down below again, you can see kind of where that distribution of rain fell. A lot of it fell down in the southern deserts, and some of it fell into the Gila, but you can also see some dry areas in the Gila too that were very much near average. Now, having said that, this is somewhat misleading, this 113, because it makes it seem like we had a really wet winter. We did have some wet spells, but we did have a lot of dry spells too, and some of those wet spells were very wet and kind of pushed the numbers above average, well above average actually. And so I don't think anybody feels like we had a real wet, heavy moisture type of winter, but the numbers do bear out that we did have a wetter than normal winter when it's all said and done. So that moisture turned off very quickly and suddenly, and so we have been dry recently, and so all that moisture that we had helps with the soil moisture, helps with the runoff, but we've had above normal temperatures here recently, which has really prematurely melted the snow also. So we are going into fire season dry as we would in most. Looking now at SNOTELs, and a couple weeks ago on the 16th, I hiked through the Silver Fire in the Black Range. I was able to get a picture of the McKnight SNOTEL, and there is some snow up there on the ridge behind it that's hard to see in the photo, but most of it's melted away. And then there's another picture down below where you can see some hang-on snow on the northern faces of some of these slopes above 9,000 feet there. If you look on the left-hand side and you look at the snow water equivalent for snow, if you look at the basins down southern New Mexico, you can see basically we've melted all this snow out. I had charts from February that show we were 150 plus. So that shows just how rapidly we've melted the snow out of the mountains with this extended period of well above normal temperatures, record-breaking temperatures that we had late February, early March. And so basically, you know, I was told the Gila's running at over 500 CFS. And when I did my hike here, there was water in every canyon that I went down into, running very nicely. So what's going to happen is we're going to lose all this water. It's not going to sit on the hills like you hope for it to do and soak in. It's actually melting away and sliding out into the lowlands, and so we won't have the full benefit of the snow that we did get this winter. Okay, number 4 now out of 5 is now we're going into what's the spring going to look like during fire season. And of course, this is a very variable time of the year. And mind you, it is our driest 3 months of the year when we get into April, May, and June. Those are the 3 months that typically have the least amount of precipitation for the entire duration of the year. And so we do anticipate that we will certainly be dry. But we are thinking that we will have an active trough pattern through spring, meaning just like what we're seeing now is we're getting a lot of Pacific low-pressure systems moving through, followed by a shortwave ridge which moves through, and so every third day or so we get one of these systems that moves through. If it moves to our north, it keeps the moisture north of us, and we're on the dry, windy side. If they sag further south, then we will get some moisture move back in. The top left shows the temperatures, and that blue line sagging down over Arizona, that's kind of like that heavy red dash line that moves down out of Oregon through California, then up across the Four Corners. That's like the typical storm track. And as that system digs south through California, it drags cold air over Arizona, but then it lifts north of the Gila and New Mexico, and that's where the warmer air would be. So the bias is for cooler conditions as you move west into Arizona, warmer conditions as you move east and through New Mexico through the spring. Now down below is the precipitation, and we show that same storm track moving across California and the Four Corners. And of course, as those systems drop down, they do pull some precipitation down into California, southern Utah, and parts of Arizona. But then they lift north of our area, and we stay, like I said, on the drier side for the most part. So the bias here looks like wetter west in Arizona into California, and then drier as you move east across New Mexico into West Texas. And certainly, like we've been seeing and will continue to see over the next several weeks and in the month to come, we'll certainly have these systems. We had one yesterday, which was Tuesday. We'll have another one Friday, another one next week. We'll have some windy periods followed by breezy conditions with deep mixing and mix down of strong winds from aloft. We've had lightning today. This is I'm recording this on Wednesday, and so we've had lightning today over the area. We'll continue to get some lightning events, especially as we move closer to the monsoon and we get into that transition period. However, the wind, the lightning will be inconsistent in time and space. We figured most of the wind will be south across the southern lowlands of New Mexico and into West Texas. Most of the dry air will be in the same area. Here's the outlook for spring as we move through those 3 months, April, May, and June. You'll notice on the top the probability for temperatures to be above normal, normal, or below normal. Above normal is all those orange colors with those probabilities showing strong potential that, especially as you get into May and June, that temperatures across our region, more so as you move east, will be above normal versus below normal. And then you go to the bottom for those 3 months, what you'll see is just white across the area on the maps with the letters EC, which means equal chances. And what that basically is telling us that there are 3 chances that we can get, or 3 outcomes, one being drier than normal, one being normal, and the other one being wetter than normal. So it's saying with the pattern that we're seeing, when we talk about pattern, we're talking El Nino versus La Nina versus neutral. We happen to be in the neutral, and so that means there's not a strong signal for wet versus dry. And so in that case, we go with climatology, which is equal chances for pretty much any outcome. I just gave a talk very similar to this over in the Gila, and I should have took this out, but I forgot, so I'll just explain it. I took those maps that you saw before on the previous slide. I took Alamogordo and Cloudcroft, and this shows each one of those locations probabilities through that 3-month period for temperature on top and precipitation on the bottom, showing those equal chances at both places for precipitation being above normal or below, and then a strong probability for above normal temperatures versus below normal. Now out in the Gila region, those 51 probabilities for above normal will be a slightly lower, but still you'll have strong probabilities for above normal. And then you will have that same bar, that same pie chart for precipitations over all the Gila that you see there. Now moving into summer now, as we start to anticipate the onset of monsoon, if you look at the top through July, August, September, again we are thinking that temperatures will certainly be above normal with high probabilities for that outcome. And then down the bottom we continue with that equal chances for any of those 3 probable outcomes with no strong signal based on the fact that we continue within a neutral El Nino versus La Nina pattern down in the Pacific Ocean. And speaking of that, El Nino versus La Nina, these are the model runs through the spring and summer, and most of those lines line up within that white section in the middle of the chart, which indicates neutral ENSO pattern through the fire season and into summer, and then going even into fall. And so what that just means is, again, like I showed you on the previous slide, is the probability is very strong here. In this case, they're showing 70% probability that we'll have above normal temperatures, and equal chances that precipitation could be either below normal, normal, or above normal, with no good signal one way or the other. So what we're thinking for monsoon, and this is based on work from Predictive Services, is that they're thinking a typical monsoon moisture onset and impacts, but still there are questions about whether or not the onset this year will be on time or maybe even a bit early. And it could be a bit early if we build up additional heat here in the southwest to help draw those southerly winds with low pressure. We call that a thermal trough or thermal low that actually draws the air in out of Mexico, and that's where the moisture tends to pool up prior to the monsoon moving into the southern United States. So now let's summarize these fire potential factors 1 through 5 and lay them on top of the map to see where they all line up. And the drought is pretty much relegated just to portions of Arizona and maybe portions of the Texas Panhandle. The rest of the area looks like they'll be okay with drought. We're not including monsoon on this one because it's still early enough that we don't have a good indicator on that. So we're basically over New Mexico looking at the alignment of the fine fuels, the seasonal temperature, and the weather pattern through the fire season. Those all stack on top of each other over New Mexico and West Texas. So it looks like an elevated potential for fire occurrence and fire activity over New Mexico and West Texas, and lesser activity over Arizona. So now here is the national map from Predictive Services for the significant wildland fire potential. And you'll notice in the southern plains of the United States, right there in the middle, is an area that they did outline as above normal potential. That included the eastern plains of New Mexico through West Texas into western Oklahoma and southwestern Kansas. And if you remember earlier this month, this was an area that did have significant fire occurrence and activity in the grass country. Now, as you get past the central mountain chain of New Mexico, moving to the west, you saw that potential dropped back down to. Now, looking at the GAC here in the southwest and how they drew the map up, you can see again for March that elevated potential was all east of the area mountains in that finer fuel across the eastern plains of New Mexico with normal conditions as you moved west. Looking ahead through the heart of fire season, April on the left and May and June on the right for the nation as a whole, but focusing in on our area, you can see that we do have some areas of above normal significant wildland fire potential right there in far west Texas and in New Mexico. Much of that is in the lower country where the lighter fuels are. And what this indicates is really, especially as you move into the Gila, you get in that higher elevation with the heavier fuels, and you start to see some of those fuels are holding moisture from the good precipitation that we've had over the last 12 months. And so you won't, most likely, you will not see those big silver fire, whitewater baldy, Miller type occurrences where a bunch of the live fuels are just ripe for burning because they're not as dry as they have been in years past. So that covers it, and I really appreciate the opportunity to bring this kind of information to you. I hope you find it useful. I know this year we're talking a lot of equal chances, which doesn't really give you a real strong indication one way or the other on moisture, but that's just the way it goes sometime with this science. So anyway, if you do have any questions, again, my name is Tom Bird. I'm here at the El Paso Weather Service office. Give me a holler at one of these numbers or email me at tom.bird@noaa.gov. Thanks again. Have a nice, safe fire season.